The dust billowed across the prairie as Josephine Zant squinted at the horizon, her eyes burning with exhaustion and the sting of betrayal. She had fled Chicago with nothing but a small trunk of belongings, a pouch of meager savings, and the bitter knowledge that the man she had trusted with her heart and future had stolen everything else. The vast Nebraska territory stretched before her, seemingly without end, as the wagon train she had joined 3 weeks prior continued its relentless pace westward toward North Platte. "We'll never reach civilization again," she murmured, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders as the April wind cut through her worn traveling dress. The year was 1867, and the promise of a new life felt as distant as the stars that appeared each night over the endless plains. "Every mile brings us closer," came a deep voice from beside her wagon. Josephine startled, turning to find Owen Tucker astride his chestnut stallion, his weathered face partially hidden beneath the wide brim of his hat. The trail boss had kept his distance from the travelers in their party, only approaching to give directions or warnings about the journey ahead. Closer to what, Mr. Tucker? More emptiness? Josephine couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. At 22, she had already seen enough hardship to last a lifetime. Owen's expression remained impassive, though something flickered in his blue eyes. "North Platte ain't just a spot on a map, Miss Zant. It's a chance. Sometimes that's all folks need." Without waiting for her response, he nudged his horse forward, continuing his vigilant patrol of the wagon train. Josephine watched him go, wondering how a man who couldn't be more than 30 could speak with such certainty. The railroad was pushing westward, and North Platte was to be an important junction. That much she knew from the advertisements that had lured so many onto this trail. She had joined the wagon train out of desperation, using the last of her funds to secure passage after discovering that her fiancé had not only abandoned her, but had emptied their joint bank account before disappearing. As the sun began to set, painting the endless sky in hues of orange and pink, the wagon master called for the party to make camp. Josephine climbed down from her perch, her legs stiff and aching. She had paid for passage but was expected to contribute to the communal efforts of the travelers. Tonight was her turn to help with the cooking. "Need a hand with that?" asked Martha Wilkins, a kindly widow traveling to meet her son in Wyoming territory. The older woman had taken Josephine under her wing, teaching her the ways of trail life. "Thank you," Josephine replied, gratefully accepting help with the heavy cast iron pot. "I never imagined how much work simply traveling could be." Martha chuckled. "Life out here is nothing but work, dear, but there's freedom in it too." As they prepared a simple stew from dried beef and the few root vegetables that had survived the journey thus far, Josephine noticed Owen Tucker speaking with 2 scouts who had ridden ahead earlier that day. His expression was serious, his posture tense. "Is something wrong?" Josephine asked when Martha returned from delivering a bowl of stew to her ailing brother in a nearby wagon. Martha followed her gaze. "The trail boss always looks like that. Carrying the weight of 30 souls isn't a light burden. He seems different tonight," Josephine observed, unable to explain the intuition that made her continue watching him. Later, as the travelers gathered around the fires for warmth and community, Josephine found herself seated not far from where Owen was discussing something in hushed tones with Jacob Winters, the wagon master. The fragment she caught mentioned creek crossing and rising waters. When Owen finally rose and walked toward his own small fire at the edge of the camp, Josephine surprised herself by following him. "Mr. Tucker," she called softly. He turned, surprise evident in his face before it returned to its usual stoic expression. "Miss Zant, something troubling you?" Is there danger ahead? I couldn't help overhearing. Owen studied her for a moment, seeming to weigh his response. Spring thaws coming late this year. The creek we need to cross is running high. Nothing we can't handle. But a hint of a smile touched his lips. Observant, aren't you? The smile faded. But it'll slow us down. Might have to camp at the crossing for a day or two. Josephine felt her heart sink. We're already behind schedule, aren't we? The pamphlet said we'd reach North Platte by the end of April. Pamphlets are written by men who have never seen the trail, Owen said bluntly. Out here, nature decides our schedule. And what happens to those of us who have nothing left if we arrive too late for the opportunities promised? The question escaped before she could stop it. Owen studied her with new interest. You running from something, Miss Zant, or towards something, she countered. Isn't everyone on this trail? He nodded slowly. Fair enough. After a moment, he gestured to the log beside his fire. Sit if you like. Night's getting cold. Josephine hesitated, aware of propriety but also of the genuine offer of warmth. She sat, careful to maintain a proper distance. The fire's heat was a welcome relief after the day's chill. First time west of the Mississippi? Owen asked, adding a small log to the fire. First time west of Chicago, she admitted. Everything seems so vast, endless. That vastness frightens some folks, others find their souls in it. He looked up at the star-filled sky. Every mile brings us closer to where we're meant to be. You said that earlier. Do you truly believe that, Mr. Tucker? Owen, he corrected quietly. And yes, I do. 6 years riding these trails has taught me that much. What brought you to this life? Josephine asked, genuinely curious about the man whose responsibility it was to guide them safely to their destination. Owen was quiet for so long that Josephine thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. War has a way of making a man seek open spaces. After Gettysburg, I couldn't abide walls anymore. The simple statement revealed more than any lengthy explanation could have. Josephine nodded, understanding in a way she hadn't expected to. I'm sorry. Don't be. Found my purpose out here. He poked at the fire. What about you? What brings a city woman to the Nebraska territory alone? Josephine stiffened slightly. Who says I'm alone? Owen's raised eyebrow was just visible in the firelight. Observation. You keep to yourself except for the widow Wilkins. No husband or family in the other wagons. Josephine hesitated, then straightened her shoulders. I was betrayed. My fiancé took everything we had saved for our future and disappeared. I had a choice between debtor's prison or a fresh start. I chose the latter. Owen nodded, no judgment in his expression. Brave choice. Necessary choice, she corrected. Still brave. He stood suddenly. It's late. You should get some rest, Miss Zant. Tomorrow's crossing will be challenging. Josephine rose as well, feeling oddly disappointed that their conversation was ending. Thank you for the fire's warmth, Mr. Tucker. Owen, he reminded her quietly. Josephine, she offered in return, before turning to make her way back to her wagon, aware of his eyes following her until she was safely at her destination. The next morning dawned cold and damp, the sky threatening rain. The travelers broke camp with practiced efficiency, though Josephine noted an undercurrent of tension. Word of the difficult crossing ahead had spread through the camp. As they approached the swollen creek around midday, Josephine could see why Owen had been concerned. What should have been a simple ford had become a rushing torrent of spring meltwater, the banks muddy and treacherous. Owen rode ahead, testing various points along the creek before returning to address the gathered wagon train. We'll cross here, one wagon at a time. Secure your belongings and make sure your oxen are well rested. This won't be easy. The first 2 wagons crossed without incident, though the water rose to the axles, and the drivers struggled to keep their teams moving forward through the current. The third wagon, however, slipped on the far bank, tilting dangerously before the driver managed to urge his team to pull it to safety. When it came time for Josephine's turn, she gripped the reins tightly, her knuckles white. She was still learning the ways of driving a team, and this would be her greatest test yet. "Miss Zant," Owen called, riding up alongside her wagon, "I'll lead your team across." Relief flooded through her, though pride made her hesitate. "I can manage." "No doubt," he replied, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. "But why risk it when help is offered?" Josephine nodded, handing him the reins. She watched as he spoke soothingly to her oxen, establishing a connection with the animals before guiding them toward the rushing water. The crossing was tense, the wagon creaking ominously as water surged around the wheels. Halfway across, one of the oxen balked, frightened by the current. Owen spoke firmly, his voice steady and reassuring. The animal responded, pulling forward once more. Just as they reached the far bank, the wagon lurched violently, caught in a hidden hole. Josephine cried out as she was thrown forward, nearly tumbling from her seat. Owen's hand shot out, catching her arm and steadying her even as he commanded the team to pull harder. With a final heave, the oxen dragged the wagon onto solid ground. Josephine found herself trembling, as much from Owen's touch as from the fear of the crossing. "You're safe now," he said quietly, releasing her arm but remaining close. "Thank you," she managed, aware of the other wagons still waiting to cross. "You should help the others." Owen nodded, handing back her reins before turning his horse back toward the creek. Josephine watched him go, her heart racing with an emotion she wasn't ready to name. By nightfall, all the wagons had crossed successfully, though the last few had struggled mightily against the rising water. The decision was made to make camp early, allowing the oxen to rest after their ordeal. Rain began to fall as the travelers set up their tents and tarps, adding to the misery of the already wet conditions. Josephine huddled beneath the canvas extension of her wagon, attempting to start a small fire with damp wood. Her efforts produced more smoke than flame, and she was close to giving up when a shadow fell across her meager pit. "Need help with that?" Owen asked, already crouching beside her without waiting for an answer. From his saddlebag, he produced a small tin of something that he sprinkled onto the struggling embers. Within moments, flames began to lick at the wood. "What is that?" Josephine asked, amazed at the transformation. "Old trapper's trick," Owen replied, settling the wood more efficiently. "Pine resin mixed with beeswax. Burns even when everything's damp." As the fire grew stronger, its warmth began to push back the chill of the rainy evening. Owen remained crouched beside her, seemingly in no hurry to leave. "The others all have their fires going," Josephine observed, wondering at his presence. "They do," he agreed, offering no further explanation. After a moment he asked, "Are you planning to stay in North Platte when we arrive?" The question surprised her. "I haven't decided yet. I have an offer of employment at a new hotel there, but—" She hesitated. "I'm not sure if that's where I'm meant to be." "Where are you meant to be, Josephine Zant?" His use of her full name sent an unexpected shiver through her that had nothing to do with the damp evening. "I wish I knew," she admitted. "A month ago I thought I had my future planned. Now I'm not sure I even know myself anymore." Owen nodded thoughtfully. The trail has a way of revealing a person's true nature. Some crumble under the hardship, others find strength they never knew they had. His blue eyes met hers. "You're among the latter." The simple statement touched something deep within her. "You can't know that. You've barely spoken to me before yesterday." "I observe," he replied. "It's my job to know who I'm leading. The quiet ones often have the most interesting stories." A comfortable silence fell between them as the rain continued its gentle patter on the canvas above. Finally, Josephine gathered her courage to ask the question that had been on her mind. "What happens when we reach North Platte? Do you continue on with another wagon train?" Owen stared into the fire for a long moment. "Usually, there's always folks wanting to head further west, but this year—" He trailed off, then shook his head slightly. "This might be my last train for a while." "Oh." Josephine tried to keep her tone casual, though she felt an inexplicable concern at the thought of him leaving. Been offered a position with the railroad security. Would mean settling in one place for a time. He glanced at her, his expression unreadable in the firelight. "Never thought I'd consider it before." Before Josephine could respond, a call came from across the camp. One of the wagons had sprung a leak in its covering, threatening the family's belongings. Owen stood quickly. "Duty calls." He hesitated, then added, "Rest well, Josephine," before disappearing into the rainy darkness. Josephine remained by her fire long after he'd gone, pondering the strange connection that seemed to be forming between them. She had sworn off men after Edward's betrayal, determined to rely only on herself. Yet there was something about Owen Tucker that made her want to trust again, despite all her reservations. The next morning brought clearing skies but muddy trails. Progress was slow, the wagons frequently becoming stuck in the soggy ground. Owen and the other experienced riders worked tirelessly, helping to free wheels from the mud and guiding the teams around the worst spots. By midday, tensions were running high among the travelers. Arguments broke out over the pace and direction, with some wanting to push harder and others insisting on caution. Josephine kept to herself, focusing on maintaining control of her team and wagon. During a brief stop to rest the animals, she noticed Owen in an intense discussion with Jacob Winters. Their expressions were grim and they kept glancing toward the northwest. Curious and concerned, Josephine approached them cautiously. "Is something wrong?" she asked when there was a pause in their conversation. Jacob looked startled by her interruption, but Owen merely nodded in acknowledgement of her presence. "Storm brewing," he said simply, pointing toward the horizon where dark clouds were beginning to gather. "Another delay." Josephine couldn't keep the disappointment from her voice. "Better delayed than dead," Jacob stated bluntly. "Spring storms out here can turn deadly quick." "We need to find shelter," Owen added. "There's an abandoned way station about 5 miles ahead. If we push hard, we can reach it before the worst hits." Jacob nodded in agreement. "I'll tell the others to secure their loads. We move in 15 minutes. As the wagon master walked away, Josephine turned to Owen. "How bad will it be?" "Can't say for certain. Could blow over, could be a gully washer that floods the trail for days." He studied her face. "You're worried about your position in North Platte." It wasn't a question, but Josephine nodded anyway. "The letter offered employment starting May 5th. We're already behind schedule and now—" "You'll make it," Owen said with unexpected gentleness. "Even if I have to carry you there myself." The promise, spoken so casually yet with such conviction, left Josephine momentarily speechless. Before she could respond, Owen had mounted his horse and was riding to help prepare the train for movement. The race against the approaching storm became increasingly tense as the afternoon progressed. The wind picked up, bringing with it the scent of rain and the distant rumble of thunder. The oxen seemed to sense the urgency, pulling steadily despite their fatigue. Owen rode constantly between the front and rear of the train, ensuring no wagon fell behind. Each time he passed Josephine, he offered a nod or a word of encouragement, his presence oddly reassuring amidst the growing apprehension. They reached the abandoned way station just as the first heavy raindrops began to fall. It was little more than a crude log structure with a partially collapsed roof, but its walls were solid and offered protection from the elements. Nearby stood a large barn, its doors hanging askew but its frame intact. "Get the animals into the barn," Jacob shouted over the rising wind. Women and children in the station. Men prepare to secure the wagons. The travelers moved with desperate efficiency, unhitching teams and guiding them into the relative safety of the barn. Josephine helped Martha Wilkins gather her belongings before assisting an exhausted mother with her 3 young children. As they hurried toward the station, a violent gust of wind tore across the clearing, ripping a tarpaulin from one of the wagons. The heavy canvas snapped like a whip, striking Josephine across the back and sending her sprawling into the rapidly forming mud. Pain lanced across her shoulders as she struggled to rise, the wind threatening to push her back down. Suddenly, strong hands were gripping her arms, pulling her upright. Owen's face was inches from hers, his expression fierce with concern. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, having to shout to be heard over the howling wind. "Just startled," Josephine gasped, though her back throbbed where the canvas had struck her. Owen's eyes narrowed, clearly not believing her, but there was no time for further discussion. Keeping one arm firmly around her waist, he half-carried her the remaining distance to the station, shielding her body with his own as the rain began to fall in earnest. Inside, the station was crowded with women and children, their faces pale with fear as the storm's fury increased. A few lanterns cast meager light across the dusty interior, shadows dancing with each gust that shook the building. "Stay here," Owen instructed, helping Josephine to a seat on an old bench. "I need to help with the wagons." "Be careful," she found herself saying, surprising both of them with the genuine concern in her voice. Something flickered in his eyes, warmth perhaps, or something deeper. Then he was gone, back into the raging storm to secure the travelers' possessions and livelihoods. The hours that followed were among the most terrifying of Josephine's life. The storm unleashed its full fury upon the small way station, wind shrieking through the gaps in the walls and rain pounding relentlessly on the remaining roof. Thunder crashed overhead, so close and loud that several children burst into tears with each boom. Martha sat beside Josephine, offering what comfort she could with her presence. "This too shall pass," the older woman murmured, though her knuckles were white where she gripped her Bible. "The men," Josephine said, unable to hide her worry, "they should have come in by now." As if in answer to her concern, the door burst open, admitting a group of drenched and exhausted men, including Jacob Winters. They brought with them the scent of rain and mud, their clothes plastered to their bodies. Josephine's eyes searched frantically among them, her heart lurching when she didn't see Owen's tall figure. "Where's Mr. Tucker?" she asked, approaching Jacob with growing dread. The wagon master's face was grim. "Still at the barn. Roof started to collapse. He and 2 others are trying to keep the animals calm and prevent a stampede." Fear clutched at Josephine's throat. "In this," she gestured toward the wall, where the wind's howl had taken on an almost demonic quality. "Man knows his duty," Jacob replied, though his own concern was evident. "Said he wouldn't risk losing the teams. Without them, we're all stranded out here." Josephine returned to her seat, every crash of thunder now bringing images of Owen fighting to protect their livelihood, their future at risk to his own safety. The minutes stretched into hours, the storm showing no signs of abating as night fell fully. Some of the children eventually succumbed to exhaustion, sleeping fitfully despite the noise. The adults maintained a tense vigil, occasionally speaking in hushed tones but mostly sitting in worried silence. It was well past midnight when the door again opened, this time admitting Owen and the 2 men who had remained with him at the barn. They were soaked to the skin, mud-covered and clearly exhausted, but appeared otherwise unharmed. Josephine was on her feet before she realized she had moved, relief washing over her at the sight of Owen's safe. He looked up, his eyes finding hers across the crowded room, and for a moment, everything else seemed to fade away. A slight nod acknowledged her concern before he turned to report to Jacob. "Barn's holding. Lost part of the north wall, but we reinforced it with wagon boards. Animals are spooked but contained." His voice was hoarse, whether from shouting over the storm or simple exhaustion. Josephine couldn't tell. Jacob clapped him on the shoulder. "Get some rest. Nothing more to be done tonight." Owen nodded wearily, accepting a blanket from one of the women. His gaze swept the room, once again finding Josephine. After a moment's hesitation, he made his way toward her. "You should try to sleep," he said as he approached, his voice low to avoid disturbing those who had managed to find rest. "As should you," Josephine countered, noting the lines of fatigue etched on his face. "You've done more than enough." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Comes with the territory." He glanced at the bench where she had been sitting. "May I?" Josephine moved over, making space for him beside her. As he settled onto the hard wooden seat, she caught the grimace he tried to hide. "You're hurt," she accused softly. "Just tired," he dismissed, though the careful way he held himself belied his words. "And wondering if I'm getting too old for this life." "You can't be more than 30, Josephine observed. 32 next month, he confirmed. "But it's not the years, it's the miles." "Every mile brings us closer," Josephine quoted his own words back to him. This time his smile was genuine, transforming his weary face. "So it does." He studied her for a moment. "You should have that back looked at when we reached North Platte." Josephine blinked in surprise. "How did you know?" "The way you're sitting, straight as a ramrod, not leaning against the wall." His eyes held genuine concern. "Canvas can cut deep, especially driven by wind like that." "It's just bruised," Josephine assured him, touched by his observation. "I've had worse." Something darkened in Owen's expression. "From your fiancé?" The question, asked so directly yet quietly, stunned Josephine. "No," she answered truthfully. "Edward was many things: a liar, a thief, but never violent. The bruises I've borne were from life's circumstances, not men's fists." Owen nodded, relief evident in his posture. "Good. Man who raises his hand to a woman isn't fit to be called a man." The conviction in his voice spoke of personal experience, and Josephine wondered what he had witnessed to form such a firm belief. Before she could consider asking, Owen's eyes had drifted closed, exhaustion finally claiming him. Josephine watched as his breathing deepened, the lines of worry temporarily erased from his face in sleep. Without thinking, she reached out to brush a strand of damp hair from his forehead. At her touch, he stirred slightly but didn't wake, his body unconsciously leaning toward her warmth. With careful movements, Josephine adjusted her position to provide better support, allowing his head to rest against her shoulder. It was highly improper, she knew, but in the midst of the storm's chaos, such concerns seemed trivial. He had risked his safety for theirs. The least she could offer was comfort in rest. As the night wore on, the storm gradually began to lose its fury. The thunder moved eastward, the rain gentling to a steady patter rather than the violent deluge of earlier hours. Josephine remained awake, keeping vigil as Owen slept, wondering at the strange twist of fate that had brought her to this moment. She had left Chicago determined to rely on no one, to rebuild her life through her own efforts alone. Yet here she was, finding unexpected strength in the presence of this quiet, steadfast man who spoke of endless trails always leading somewhere meaningful. When dawn finally broke, it revealed a transformed landscape. The clearing around the station had become a sea of mud, with wagons half sunk in the mire. Trees that had stood proud the day before were now stripped of branches or toppled entirely. The partially repaired barn leaned precariously, though it had somehow withstood the worst of the storm. Owen woke as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the station's grimy windows. For a moment, he seemed disoriented, then realization dawned as he straightened quickly, putting space between himself and Josephine. "I apologize," he said stiffly, a flush creeping up his neck. "That was inappropriate of me." "You were exhausted," Josephine replied simply. "There's no need for apology." His eyes searched hers, looking for judgment or discomfort and finding none. The tension in his shoulders eased slightly. "Thank you," he said quietly, the words encompassing more than just her understanding. The aftermath of the storm brought new challenges. The trail had been transformed into a quagmire in many places, impassable until it dried. The damaged barn required immediate repairs to keep the animals sheltered. Food supplies, carefully rationed for the journey, would now need to stretch further than planned. Owen took charge with quiet efficiency, organizing the men into work parties while ensuring the women and children had what they needed for comfort. Josephine found herself assigned to inventory the remaining provisions, working alongside Martha to determine how long they could sustain the group at the way station. "We have enough flour and salt pork for perhaps a week," Martha concluded after they had examined all the wagon stores. "The dried fruits and beans will last longer. Game is plentiful in these parts so the men can hunt." "A week," Josephine repeated, dismayed. "We're already behind schedule. This could mean—" "Means we're alive, dear," Martha said firmly. "That's what matters now. The rest will sort itself out." Throughout the day, Josephine caught glimpses of Owen as he worked tirelessly to organize their temporary settlement. He moved with purpose, his leadership evident in the way others followed his instructions without question. Occasionally, their eyes would meet across the clearing, a moment of silent connection before they each returned to their tasks. By evening, a semblance of order had been established. The barn was secured enough to shelter the animals. The wagons had been arranged to provide additional windbreaks, and communal cooking fires were providing the first hot meal many had had since the previous day. As Josephine helped serve the simple stew, Owen approached, his clothes still bearing the evidence of hard labor but his face more relaxed than it had been that morning. "Jacob and I rode out to check the trail," he said without preamble. "It's as bad as we feared. Washed out in several places, bridges gone at 2 creek crossings." Josephine's heart sank. "How long?" "4 days at minimum before we can move on, possibly a week." His eyes held genuine regret. "I'm sorry, Josephine. I know what this means for your plans." The use of her first name, spoken with such personal concern, caught her attention more than the news itself. "You remembered," she said softly. "Your job in North Platte," he confirmed. "May 5th. "It's just a job," Josephine found herself saying, surprising herself with the realization that she meant it. "There will be others." Owen studied her face, seeming to search for something. "I've been thinking," he said finally, his voice dropping so only she could hear. "The railroad position I mentioned, it comes with quarters. Small but decent. They're hiring women too for the office and such." Josephine's breath caught at what he seemed to be suggesting. "Mr. Tucker, Owen," he corrected gently. "Owen," she amended. "Are you offering to help me find employment with the railroad?" A faint smile touched his lips. "Among other things, perhaps." Before she could respond, he continued, "But that's a conversation for another time. Right now you should eat while it's hot." He nodded toward the stew she was still holding. As he walked away to continue his rounds of the camp, Josephine stood motionless, the bowl cooling in her hands as she considered the implications of his words. Among other things, he had said. What exactly did that mean? The enforced stay at the way station created a strange interlude in the journey. With no possibility of immediate progress, the travelers settled into temporary routines. Repairs were made to wagons and equipment that had been damaged in the storm. Hunting parties went out daily, returning with deer and wild turkey to supplement their provisions. The women organized a makeshift school for the children, taking turns teaching basic lessons. Josephine found herself drawn into the communal efforts, discovering skills she hadn't known she possessed. She had always lived in cities, where interdependence was masked by the structures of urban life. Here, on the frontier, mutual reliance was naked and essential. Owen remained a constant, steadying presence, though his duties kept him busy from dawn until well after dusk each day. Their interactions were brief, but increasingly comfortable, small moments of connection amid the larger concerns of the group. On the third evening after the storm, Josephine was gathering firewood at the edge of the clearing when she heard the snap of a twig behind her. She turned quickly, relieved to see Owen rather than some wild animal or stranger. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said, stepping forward to take the armload of branches from her. "We've seen signs of wolf packs nearby." "I didn't go far," Josephine defended, though she was secretly glad of his concern. "And we needed the wood." Owen nodded, adding his own gathered branches to her pile. "Walk back with me." They moved together through the lengthening shadows, the silence between them companionable rather than awkward. As they approached the glow of the camp's fires, Owen suddenly stopped. "I've been meaning to ask you something," he said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. Josephine turned to face him, curious at this change in his usually confident demeanor. "Yes." "When we reach North Platte," he paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "Would you allow me to call on you properly? Once you're settled, I mean." The request, so formal and unexpectedly traditional, brought a warmth to Josephine's cheeks that had nothing to do with the nearby fires. "I would like that," she answered honestly. "Though I'm not sure where I'll be settled yet." Owen's expression lightened. "We'll figure that part out when we get there." He gestured toward the camp. "For now, let's get this wood where it's needed." The simple exchange marked a shift in their relationship, an acknowledgement of possibilities that neither had voiced before. As they rejoined the others, Josephine was aware of curious glances from some of the women, particularly Martha, whose knowing smile suggested she had observed more than Josephine had realized. The next morning brought clearer skies and the first real hint of spring warmth. Jacob announced that the trail ahead was beginning to dry and that they would attempt to move on the following day if conditions continued to improve. The news was met with cheers from the travelers, eager to resume their journey after the unexpected delay. Preparations began immediately, with everyone working to ready the wagons and animals for travel. Josephine found herself busy from dawn until dusk, helping to pack the communal supplies and ensure her own wagon was properly prepared. It was late afternoon when she finally had a moment to herself, taking the opportunity to wash her face and hands in a basin of water she had warmed by the fire. As she dried her face with a small cloth, she became aware of someone approaching and looked up to find Owen standing a respectful distance away. "Jacob says we'll be ready to move at first light," he said, his eyes taking in her freshly washed appearance with evident appreciation. "The trail won't be easy for the first few miles, but it improves after that." "That's good news," Josephine replied, self-consciously tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Everyone is eager to be moving again." Owen nodded, then seemed to hesitate before speaking again. "I wanted to give you something for the journey ahead." From his pocket, he withdrew a small object and held it out to her. Josephine accepted it curiously, finding a beautifully carved wooden compass, its surface polished smooth by handling. The needle moved freely, pointing steadily north. "It's lovely," she said, genuinely touched by the unexpected gift. "It was my father's," Owen explained. "He gave it to me when I left home at 17, said as long as I knew which way was north, I'd never truly be lost." The personal significance of the gift took Josephine's breath away. "Owen, I can't accept this. It's too important." "That's why I want you to have it," he said simply. "The trail ahead may still seem endless at times, but with that, you'll always know which way leads home." The word home hung between them, laden with meaning. Josephine closed her fingers around the compass, feeling its weight and history. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'll treasure it." Their eyes held for a long moment, a deeper understanding passing between them. Then Owen nodded, a small smile touching his lips before he turned to continue his preparations for their departure. Josephine watched him go, the compass warm in her palm, her heart lighter than it had been in months. The wagon train's departure the next morning was marked by a renewed sense of purpose and community. The days spent at the way station had forged stronger bonds among the travelers, transforming them from a collection of individual families into a cohesive group with shared experiences and goals. True to Jacob's prediction, the first few miles proved challenging, the trail still muddy and rutted from the storm. Wagons frequently became stuck, requiring the combined efforts of men and oxen to free them. Progress was slow but steady. Each mile gained a small victory against the elements. Josephine found herself handling the difficulties with unexpected confidence. The skills she had developed during their journey so far served her well, and when she did struggle, help was readily offered by her fellow travelers. Owen remained vigilant, riding constantly between the front and rear of the train to ensure no one fell too far behind. Each time he passed Josephine's wagon, he offered a word of encouragement or a small gesture of acknowledgement, the connection between them strengthening despite the brevity of these interactions. By midday, they had covered only a few miles, but the trail ahead looked increasingly passable. The worst of the storm's damage appeared to be behind them, allowing Jacob to call for a brief rest to water the animals and allow the travelers to stretch their legs. As Josephine climbed down from her wagon, she noticed Owen deep in conversation with a stranger, a rider who had approached from the direction they were heading. The man's expression was serious as he handed Owen what appeared to be a letter or newspaper. Curious and slightly concerned, Josephine made her way toward them, arriving just as the stranger mounted his horse to depart. "Is something wrong?" she asked as Owen unfolded what she could now see was a week-old newspaper from North Platte. "News from ahead," he replied, his expression unreadable as he scanned the print. "The storm hit North Platte before it reached us. Some damage to the town, including the new hotel that was being built." Josephine felt a chill that had nothing to do with the spring air. "The hotel where I was to work," Owen nodded slowly. "Roof collapsed, construction delayed by at least a month, possibly longer." He looked up at her, his eyes filled with genuine regret. "I'm sorry, Josephine. The news should have devastated her." The position at the hotel had been her lifeline, her reason for making this difficult journey. Yet as she absorbed Owen's words, Josephine found herself experiencing not despair but a strange sense of relief. "Perhaps it's for the best," she said quietly. Owen's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You're taking this remarkably well." Josephine reached into her pocket, feeling the smooth wood of the compass he had given her. "Someone recently reminded me that knowing which way is north is sometimes more important than knowing the exact destination." A slow smile spread across Owen's face, warming his eyes. "Wise words." "From a wise man," she returned, her own smile matching his. Their moment of connection was interrupted by Jacob calling for the travelers to return to their wagons. As they prepared to continue their journey, Josephine found her thoughts turning not to what she had lost, but to what unexpected possibilities might lie ahead. The next few days brought steady progress as the trail conditions improved and the travelers fell into a rhythm of movement. The Nebraska landscape began to change subtly, the endless flatness giving way to gentle undulations as they approached the North Platte River Valley. Spring was asserting itself more confidently, with wildflowers appearing in colorful patches across the prairie and buds swelling on the occasional trees. On the evening of their fourth day of travel since leaving the way station, Jacob announced that they would reach North Platte by midday tomorrow. The news brought a mixture of excitement and apprehension to the travelers, many of whom had been journeying for weeks or even months to reach this point. After the evening meal, Josephine sat beside her small fire, contemplating what awaited her in the frontier town ahead. Without the hotel position, her future was once again uncertain, yet the fear that would have once accompanied such uncertainty was notably absent. "May I join you?" Owen's voice broke into her thoughts. He stood at the edge of her fire's light, his tall figure silhouetted against the darkening sky. "Please," Josephine replied, gesturing to the space beside her. As Owen settled onto the ground, she noticed he carried something wrapped in oilcloth. "I've been making inquiries," he said without preamble, "about opportunities in North Platte for someone with your abilities." "My abilities?" Josephine questioned, surprised by his approach. "You're educated, articulate, good with figures," Owen listed. "I've seen you helping the children with their lessons, balancing the communal supplies, writing letters for Mrs. Wilkins." Josephine felt a flush of pleasure at his observations. "Those are hardly unique skills. They're valuable on the frontier," Owen countered, "especially combined with your determination and adaptability." He unfolded the oilcloth, revealing several folded papers. "The railroad office is seeking someone to assist with correspondence and accounting. The pay is decent, with room and board included for female employees in a supervised boarding house." Josephine accepted the papers, scanning them in the firelight. "You arranged this." "I made the inquiry," Owen clarified. "Whether you pursue it is entirely your decision. But it would give you time to consider your options without immediate financial pressure." The thoughtfulness of his action touched her deeply. "Thank you, Owen. This is more than I expected." He nodded, his expression serious in the flickering light. "There's something else I should tell you before we reach North Platte." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "The railroad security position I mentioned, I've accepted it." Josephine felt her heart quicken. "You won't be leading wagon trains anymore. Not for the foreseeable future. The railroad needs experienced men who know the territory and can handle trouble. The pay is better, the risk somewhat less than constant travel." His eyes met hers directly. "And it means staying in one place." The implications of his words hung between them, unspoken yet clear. "North Platte," Josephine said softly. "North Platte," Owen confirmed. "At least for now. As the railroad expands westward, that could change, but for a year or two." "A lot can happen in a year or two," Josephine observed, her voice barely above a whisper. Owen's gaze remained steady. "Yes, it can." After a moment, he added, "I meant what I said about calling on you properly, if that's still something you'd welcome." Josephine felt a smile form, genuine and unforced. "It is." The simplicity of their exchange belied the significance of the moment. Two people, brought together by circumstance and hardship, acknowledging the possibility of something more intentional, more lasting. As they sat in comfortable silence watching the fire, Josephine reflected on the strange journey that had brought her here. From the devastation of betrayal in Chicago to the precarious hope of a new beginning on the frontier, each step had seemed uncertain, each mile endless. Yet somehow, she had found not just survival but the potential for something she had almost stopped believing in, a future shaped by trust and mutual respect. The following morning dawned clear and warm, perfect traveling weather for their final push to North Platte. The wagon train moved with renewed energy, everyone eager to reach their destination after the long and challenging journey. As they crested a gentle rise around midday, the settlement came into view in the distance, a collection of wooden buildings clustered near the river, with the railroad tracks cutting a straight line through the landscape. Smoke rose from several chimneys, and even from this distance, the activity of a growing frontier town was evident. Josephine felt a complex mixture of emotions as she gazed at North Platte. It wasn't Chicago, with its bustling streets and brick buildings. It was raw, unfinished, a place of beginnings rather than established comforts. Yet there was something appealing about its openness, its lack of pretension. Owen rode up beside her wagon, his expression thoughtful as he too looked toward the town. "Journey's end," he said simply. "Or beginning," Josephine countered, meeting his eyes. A smile touched his lips. "Always the optimist." "I'm learning to be," she replied honestly. As they continued toward the town, Josephine found herself remembering their first real conversation weeks ago. She had been despairing, convinced the trail was endless. Owen had told her then that every mile brought them closer. At the time, she had assumed he meant closer to North Platte, to their physical destination. Now she wondered if he had meant something else entirely, that each mile, each shared hardship and triumph, had brought them closer to understanding themselves and each other. The wagon train's arrival in North Platte created a small stir in the frontier town. Local residents came out to greet the newcomers, offering information and assistance with finding accommodations. The railroad company had representatives present to meet those who had come specifically for work on the expanding line. In the organized chaos of arrival, Josephine found herself temporarily separated from Owen as he assisted other travelers and coordinated with local officials. Martha Wilkins stayed close by, her practical nature a steadying influence as they navigated the unfamiliar surroundings. "You should inquire about that railroad office position right away," Martha advised as they watched their wagons being directed to a designated area. "Good jobs don't remain vacant long in towns like this." Josephine nodded, though her attention was divided between practical considerations and the occasional glimpse of Owen's tall figure moving through the crowd. "I will, but first I need to find where I'll be staying tonight." "The boarding house is just down that way," Martha pointed. "Mrs. Abernathy runs a respectable establishment for single women. My nephew's wife stayed there when she first arrived last year." With Martha's guidance, Josephine secured a room at the boarding house, small but clean, with a window overlooking the main street. The rate was reasonable, and Mrs. Abernathy, a formidable widow in her 50s, made it clear that her house operated under strict rules of propriety. "No gentlemen callers in private rooms," she stated firmly as she showed Josephine upstairs. "The parlor is available for receiving visitors between 2 and 8 in the evening, with proper chaperonage, of course." "Of course," Josephine agreed, suppressing a smile at the woman's serious tone. The standards were actually more relaxed than what she had known in Chicago society, but she appreciated the attempt to maintain decorum in the frontier setting. After settling her few belongings in her room, Josephine made her way to the railroad office. The papers Owen had given her carefully tucked in her reticule. The building was one of the more substantial structures in town. 2 stories of sturdy construction with the Union Pacific logo prominently displayed. Inside, she found a busy office with several clerks working at desks, and a constant flow of people coming and going with questions and business. She approached a harried-looking older man who appeared to be in charge. "Excuse me," she began politely. "I was informed that there might be a position available for someone with experience in correspondence and accounting." The man looked up, his initial impatience giving way to interest as he took in her appearance and manner of speaking. "You're from the wagon train that just arrived?" "Yes, sir. My name is Josephine Zant. I traveled from Chicago." "Chicago, eh?" He seemed impressed. "We don't get many with city education out here. You have references?" Josephine hesitated, then decided on honesty. "My circumstances in leaving Chicago were complicated. I worked for Harrington and Sons Mercantile for 3 years as a bookkeeper, but I left rather suddenly." To her surprise, the man chuckled. "Half the people out here are running from something, Miss Zant. It's what you bring to the table now that matters." He extended his hand. "Harold Jenkins, station manager. Can you start tomorrow?" The simplicity of the offer after her weeks of anxiety was almost shocking. "Yes," Josephine managed. "Yes, I can. 8 o'clock sharp. Wage is $3 a week with half-day Saturdays. As a female employee, you're entitled to discounted room and board at the company boarding house, but if you've already made arrangements elsewhere, that's your business." "Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. I appreciate the opportunity." As Josephine left the railroad office, a sense of accomplishment warmed her. She had secured employment on her own merits, without relying on charity or compromising her principles. It wasn't the grand hotel position she had originally envisioned, but in many ways it was better, more stable, with potential for advancement as the railroad grew. She was so preoccupied with her thoughts that she almost collided with Owen as she rounded the corner toward the boarding house. "Josephine," he said, steadying her with a hand on her arm, "I've been looking for you." "I was at the railroad office," she explained, unable to keep the satisfaction from her voice. "I start work tomorrow." Owen's face brightened. "That's wonderful news. You took the position we discussed." "I did. Mr. Jenkins seemed pleased to hire someone with experience from Chicago. He should be. You're overqualified, if anything." Owen glanced around the busy street, then gestured toward a small cafe across the way. "Would you join me for coffee? I'd like to hear about your impressions of North Platte." The invitation was casual, but Josephine didn't miss the careful way he phrased it: public, proper, respecting her reputation in their new surroundings. "I'd like that," she accepted. The cafe was simple but clean, offering basic fare to travelers and locals alike. They found a table near the window, where they could observe the activity of the growing town while conversing. "It's not what I expected," Josephine admitted after they had been served coffee in thick mugs. "It's more organized than I imagined, less lawless." Owen nodded. "North Platte's growing fast because of the railroad. The company doesn't tolerate much disorder, bad for business. Still has its rough edges, especially at night, but it's a far cry from some of the places further west." "Have you been to many of them? The places further west, California, Oregon Territory, parts of Colorado and Montana?" Owen sipped his coffee. "Beautiful country, much of it, dangerous too." "Yet you've chosen to stay here, at least for now," Josephine observed. Owen's eyes met hers. "I have my reasons." The simple statement carried weight beyond its words, and Josephine felt a flutter of anticipation in her chest. "Your railroad security position, when do you begin?" "Already have. Reported this morning while you were getting settled." He rolled his shoulders slightly. Strange wearing a badge after all these years of answering only to myself on the trail. But it suits you, Josephine said, recognizing the natural authority he had always carried. A smile touched his lips. We'll see. It's different, protecting property and enforcing rules rather than guiding people to new beginnings. He paused, his expression growing more serious. Though some beginnings are worth staying in one place for. Before Josephine could respond to the implied meaning in his words, the cafe door opened, admitting Martha Wilkins and her brother. The older woman spotted them immediately, her face lighting with pleased recognition. Josephine, Mr. Tucker. How lovely to find you both here, she exclaimed, approaching their table. My brother has just secured us rooms at the hotel until our house is ready. Isn't that wonderful? The moment for private conversation had passed, but as they included Martha and her brother in their coffee, Josephine found she didn't mind. There would be time for deeper discussions in the days ahead. For now, it was enough to be establishing herself in this new place, surrounded by people who had shared the journey with her. The following weeks brought a rhythm to Josephine's life in North Platte that was both familiar and entirely new. Her work at the railroad office proved challenging but satisfying, utilizing her skills while teaching her about the complex operations of the expanding transportation network. Mr. Jenkins was a demanding but fair employer, and Josephine quickly earned his respect with her efficiency and attention to detail. Life at Mrs. Abernathy's boarding house was comfortable, if somewhat restrictive. The other female boarders were mostly teachers, nurses, or office workers like herself, women who had come west seeking opportunity and independence. Friendships formed over shared meals and evening conversations in the parlor, creating a sense of community that eased the transition to frontier life. True to his word, Owen began calling on Josephine properly. His first official visit to the boarding house parlor caused quite a stir among the other residents, his tall figure and quiet confidence drawing admiring glances and whispered comments. Mrs. Abernathy maintained her role as chaperone with diligent attention. Though her obvious approval of Owen as a gentleman of good character was evident in the extra cookies, she served with tea. Their courtship progressed with careful propriety, but growing warmth. Sunday afternoons became their special time, with walks along the river or shared meals at the cafe where they had first talked in North Platte. Owen proved to be thoughtful and attentive, always respectful of Josephine's independence while making his growing affection clear. "You're settling well here," he observed one Sunday in late May as they walked along a path that followed the North Platte River. The day was warm, the landscape lush with late spring growth. "Better than I expected," Josephine admitted. "Though I still find myself startled sometimes by how different everything is from Chicago." "Different better or different worse?" Owen asked, genuinely curious. Josephine considered the question seriously. "Different. Freer, I think. There's less concern with how things have always been done, more focus on what works now." She glanced up at him. "People here seem to judge based on character and capability rather than family connections or social standing." Owen nodded. "Frontier necessities. Can't afford too many artificial distinctions when survival depends on working together." He offered his hand to help her over a fallen log, maintaining his hold even after she was safely across. "Though some traditions are worth preserving." His fingers were warm around hers, the contact simple yet meaningful. Josephine made no move to withdraw her hand. "Which traditions do you value, Owen Tucker?" "Honesty, respect, keeping your word." He looked down at their joined hands, proper intentions made clear. The implication in his words sent a flutter through Josephine's chest. "Those aren't just traditions," she observed softly. "They're values." "Yes," Owen agreed, his blue eyes serious as they met hers. "The kind worth building a life on." They continued their walk, hands still linked, the unspoken understanding between them deepening with each step. No formal declaration had been made, but Josephine found herself increasingly certain of the direction their relationship was taking and increasingly comfortable with that prospect. June brought increasing activity to North Platte, as more settlers and workers arrived with the improving weather. The railroad's westward construction accelerated, bringing both prosperity and challenges to the growing town. Owen's position with railroad security kept him busy, often requiring long hours and occasional travel to trouble spots along the line. Josephine's responsibilities at the office expanded as well. Mr. Jenkins, recognizing her capabilities, began assigning her more complex tasks, including coordinating supply shipments and maintaining correspondence with Eastern investors. The work was demanding but satisfying, giving her a sense of contribution to the region's development. Despite their busy schedules, Josephine and Owen maintained their Sunday tradition, each meeting strengthening the bond between them. They spoke of their pasts: Owen's childhood on a Pennsylvania farm, his service in the Union Army, his decision to head west after the war's end, Josephine's upbringing in a middle-class Chicago family, her need to support herself after her parents' deaths, the painful betrayal that had ultimately led her to the Nebraska Territory. "I used to think that was the worst day of my life," Josephine confided as they sat on a blanket by the river one warm afternoon, sharing a simple picnic. "Finding Edward's note saying he'd taken our savings and left for California, I felt such a fool." Owen's expression darkened at the mention of her former fiancé. "Man like that doesn't deserve a moment of your regret." "I don't regret him anymore," Josephine said truthfully. "If he hadn't betrayed me, I would never have left Chicago, never have taken that wagon train west." She met Owen's eyes. "Never have met you." The simple statement hung between them, heavy with meaning. Owen reached across the blanket, taking her hand in his. "Then perhaps I owe him my gratitude, though I'd still break his nose if I ever met him." Josephine laughed, the sound bright in the summer air. "My gallant protector." "Always," Owen said, the word a promise rather than a casual response. As July approached, North Platte prepared for its first Independence Day celebration as an incorporated town. Committees were formed, decorations planned, and a grand picnic organized for the entire community. The excitement was palpable, providing a welcome distraction from the routines of daily work. On the Sunday before the celebration, Owen arrived at the boarding house for his usual visit with Josephine, but his manner seemed different, more formal, almost nervous. Mrs. Abernathy, ever observant, raised an eyebrow but made herself scarce after serving the customary tea, leaving them alone in the parlor for the first time since their courtship began. "Is something wrong?" Josephine asked as Owen paced the small room instead of taking his usual seat. He stopped, turning to face her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "No, not wrong at all." He took a deep breath. "I have something to ask you, Josephine." Her heart began to race as he approached, then to her astonishment lowered himself to one knee before her chair. From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box. "I had planned to wait until after the Independence Day celebrations," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "But I find I can't wait any longer." He opened the box, revealing a simple but beautiful ring with a small diamond set in gold. "Josephine Zant, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Though she had begun to anticipate this moment, the reality of it, Owen kneeling before her, Offering his heart and future left Josephine momentarily speechless. Memories of their journey flashed through her mind: his steady presence on the trail, his quiet strength during the storm, his belief in her when her own confidence faltered. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly, "Yes, Owen, I will marry you." His face transformed with joy as he took the ring from its box and slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, catching the afternoon light as Josephine extended her hand to admire it. "It was my mother's," Owen explained, rising to sit beside her. "I sent for it after I knew you were the one I wanted to give it to." "It's beautiful," Josephine said sincerely, touched by the family connection. "When did you know?" Owen's smile was warm as he took her hand, the ring now a tangible symbol of their commitment. "I think part of me knew that day on the trail when you questioned whether we'd ever reach civilization. You were tired, frustrated, yet still moving forward." He brushed a strand of hair from her face with gentle fingers. "But I was certain during the storm, when I woke to find you'd let me rest against you all night. Your strength, your compassion, I knew then I'd found someone rare." Josephine leaned into his touch, propriety momentarily forgotten. "I feared I would never trust again after what happened in Chicago. You showed me that true reliability isn't about grand promises, it's about being present day after day, mile after mile." Their faces were close now, the moment intimate despite the public setting of the parlor. With careful reverence, Owen leaned forward, his lips meeting hers in their first kiss, gentle yet firm, a promise sealed. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Owen kept his forehead rested against hers. "I love you, Josephine Zant. Have for longer than I cared to admit to myself." "And I love you, Owen Tucker," she replied, the words feeling right and true. "Enough to follow you anywhere, even if the trail seems endless." He smiled at her reference to their first meaningful conversation. "Every mile brings us closer," he quoted softly, "to each other, to home." "Home," Josephine repeated, realizing the word no longer brought images of Chicago's bustling streets, but rather the possibility of a life built together in this new place. "When shall we marry?" "As soon as you wish," Owen answered. "Though I have something to show you first, if you'll come with me." "Curious." Josephine agreed, and after informing Mrs. Abernathy of their engagement, to the older woman's obvious delight, they set out together into the warm July afternoon. Owen led her to the western edge of town, where new construction was expanding North Platte's boundaries. They stopped before a small but well-built house set slightly apart from its neighbors, with a view of both the river and the distant prairie. "It's not finished yet," Owen said, a hint of uncertainty in his voice for the first time that day. "But it will be by the end of August if that timing suits you." Josephine stared at the structure, understanding dawning. "This is, for us?" Owen nodded. "I've been working on it in my spare time since May. 2 bedrooms, a proper kitchen, space for a garden in back." He watched her face carefully. "It's not a city mansion." "It's perfect," Josephine interrupted, emotion thick in her voice. The house represented everything their relationship had become: solid, thoughtfully constructed, built with care and foresight. Absolutely perfect. Relief and joy mingled in Owen's expression. "Then August, for the wedding." "August," Josephine confirmed, already imagining their life together in this home they would share. "A new beginning in our own place." The weeks that followed were filled with preparations, both for the wedding and for their future life together. Josephine continued her work at the railroad office, though Mr. Jenkins had reluctantly accepted that he would eventually need to find her replacement. Owen's position provided stable income and increasing responsibility as the railroad's presence in North Platte expanded. The town embraced their engagement with genuine warmth. Martha Wilkins insisted on hosting a small celebration at her newly completed home, bringing together friends from the wagon train journey and new acquaintances from North Platte. The community's support reinforced Josephine's growing sense of belonging, so different from the often superficial social connections she had known in Chicago. On a perfect August morning, with wildflowers adorning the small church and sunlight streaming through simple glass windows, Josephine Zant became Josephine Tucker. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, their vows spoken with clear conviction before a gathering of people who had become important in their shared life. Martha served as Josephine's matron of honor, while Jacob Winters stood as Owen's best man, connections from the journey that had brought them together, now witnessing the formal beginning of their life's path. As they walked back down the aisle together, Josephine's hand firmly clasped in her new husband's, she felt a sense of rightness that transcended the day's happiness. What had begun as desperate flight from betrayal had transformed into a journey towards something far more valuable than she had ever imagined finding. Later that evening, as Owen carried her across the threshold of their new home completed just days before the wedding, Josephine felt the final pieces of her new life falling into place. The house was simply but comfortably furnished, with touches that reflected both their tastes and practical needs. "Welcome home, Mrs. Tucker," Owen said softly as he set her down in the front room, his arms remaining around her waist. "Home," Josephine echoed, leaning into his embrace. "I never thought I'd find that word meaningful again." "And now?" Owen asked, his eyes warm as they gazed down at her. "Now it means you," she answered simply. "Wherever we are together." Their life together in North Platte established a rhythm that balanced hard work with deepening connection. The railroad's expansion brought increasing prosperity to the town, though not without challenges. Owen's position with security sometimes required difficult decisions and occasional danger, while Josephine found new purpose in helping establish the town's first lending library, alongside her continued part-time work with the railroad office. By the spring of 1868, their home had become a gathering place for friends and newcomers alike. Josephine's natural hospitality and Owen's quiet strength created a welcoming atmosphere that drew people together, strengthening the community bonds that were essential to frontier life. It was during one such gathering, celebrating the first anniversary of their arrival in North Platte, that Josephine pulled Owen aside into the kitchen, her expression both nervous and excited. "I have something to tell you," she said quietly, ensuring they wouldn't be overheard by their guests. "Something important." Owen's face immediately grew concerned. "Is everything all right?" A smile bloomed across Josephine's face, radiant with happiness. "More than all right. Owen, we're going to have a child. Dr. Matthews confirmed it yesterday." For a moment, Owen stood perfectly still, processing her words. Then, with a joy that transformed his usually reserved expression, he swept her into his arms, careful despite his excitement. "A child," he repeated, wonder in his voice. "Our child." "Due in late October," Josephine confirmed, her own happiness reflected in his response. "Are you pleased?" "Pleased doesn't begin to describe it," Owen said fervently, one hand gently resting on her still flat stomach. "I love you, Josephine Tucker, more each day." "And I love you," she replied, covering his hand with her own. "My compass. My home." Their son, William James Tucker, was born on a crisp October morning in 1868, his arrival greeted with joy not only by his parents but by the extended community that had become their family. With Owen's steady blue eyes and Josephine's determined chin, he embodied the union of two people who had found each other against all odds. As Josephine sat in the rocking chair by the window, nursing their son while Owen watched with undisguised adoration. She reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The trail that had once seemed endless had led exactly where she needed to be, not to a place, but to a person, a love, a life built on shared values and mutual respect. "What are you thinking about?" Owen asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "The day we met," Josephine answered honestly. "How certain I was that we'd never reach anywhere worthwhile. How you told me every mile brings us closer." Owen smiled, moving to stand beside her chair, one hand gently touching their son's downy head. "Some journeys never really end," he observed. "They just change direction." "This is a good direction," Josephine said softly, looking up at the man who had become her partner in all things. "The best possible one." "With miles yet to go," Owen agreed, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "Together." Outside their window, North Platte continued its own journey from frontier outpost to established town. Trains arrived and departed, bringing new faces and opportunities. The future stretched before them, full of possibilities both known and yet to be discovered. But in that moment, with their son cradled between them and their home secure around them, Josephine and Owen Tucker had indeed reached their destination, not an endpoint, but a continuing path walked side by side, every step bringing them closer to the fullness of a life shared in love. Years later, when William had been joined by a sister, Emma Ruth, and their home had expanded to accommodate their growing family, Josephine sometimes took out the wooden compass Owen had given her on the trail. Though its surface was now worn smooth from handling, the needle still pointed steadily north, a reminder of beginnings and guidance found when most needed. "Tell us the story again, Mama," 10-year-old Emma would beg as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the Nebraska sky. "About you and Papa on the endless trail." And Josephine would smile, catching Owen's eye across the porch where he sat mending William's fishing rod, their unspoken connection as strong as ever after more than a decade together. "Once," she would begin, "I thought the trail was endless with nothing but hardship ahead. And Papa said every mile brings us closer," Emma would finish, having heard the story many times but never tiring of it. "That's right," Owen would confirm, his voice still carrying the quiet conviction that had first drawn Josephine to him all those years ago. And it did, to everything that matters. In those moments, surrounded by the family and home they had built together, Josephine knew with absolute certainty that some journeys, while they might seem endless in the moment, lead exactly where the heart most needs to go if only you have the courage to keep moving forward, 1 mile at a time, toward the horizon of possibility.